It looks like it's saying my internet connection is unstable. I hope this actually works. And I have my Invisalign in, so I might be lisping. Nonetheless, we're here. One of the themes that I've noticed a lot over the last 3 years working with people and their dogs is communication needs to be effective in order um, to provide clarity for dogs. Recently had a new dog client come and people who have had dogs in the past had a decent understanding and that, hey, I before I even go there, I've been there before. Like I've had dogs without having the knowledge that I have now, and now that I look back at the way I worked with my dogs in the past, wow. Um, but I've worked with a lot of people and a lot of dogs over the last number of years, and I see this very common thread in the sense that when we don't understand how to communicate with our dogs get very confused. And so when our dogs are confused, they try all kinds of things to make their life better in the sense that they're trying to improve their situation. So when you ask a dog to sit, but they down or they spin around or they bark or whatever, they paw at you, they don't know what you're talking about. So maybe a dog will understand how to sit in the kitchen, but then you take the dog out to the front yard and they don't know how to do it, or you put them in the car and they don't know how to sit in the car, or you take them to a dog group session and there's a whole bunch of other dogs there and you're asking your dog to sit, but the dog is just overwhelmed in a new environment and a new environment that has a whole bunch of dogs. And you're probably nervous walking into that situation and your dog hasn't generalized the various skills that you're working with. And so what ends up happening is your dog just ends up panicking because they, one, don't have clarity from you. Two, the skills haven't been generalized. Three, they're in an environment that's very confusing and stimulating for them. And then what ends up happening is they're not doing the thing that you asked them to do, and then you get frustrated, and then you start applying more pressure to the dog. So for an example of this I've seen recently is, and no fault to the owners at all, it's just because they don't or they didn't understand the fine minute or the small details about communication. Once I showed them that, then things started to work in their direction. But asking a dog to sit, the dog doesn't sit, so we're having to like manually manipulate the dog with our hands, use the leash, or popping on the leash, or getting mad at the dog, saying sit, 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 sit. When the dog finally gets into position, we're not rewarding them for getting into that position, and then what happens is the dog breaks the position. so so it becomes this vicious circle of discomfort or confusion is probably the better word. So what we then have to do is figure out, okay, if I want my dog to do this specific skill in all environments, I have to understand, first of all, I have to understand how to effectively demonstrate or teach this to my dog. Once I can effectively teach my dog this skill in a very low stimulation environment, then I move into like if in my house is level 1, then I move to level 2 and I do the same process and I teach that skill the same way. Then I move to level 3 and I do the same process and I teach the skill the same way. And if the dog then starts to understand, like, oh, okay, so we did this in the kitchen, we did this in the backyard, we did this in the alley, we did this in the front yard, we did this when we were out at the park. Now we're at the hardware store and we're doing the same thing. I understand this process. It's a ritual that you've created through your communication process and your movement process that the dog understands. And a great example of this, and I'm sort of bouncing back and forth because that's how my brain works. I just verbalize as I go, and this is the idea of this live. The dog then understands, like, okay, so there's a start and an end to everything you're asking me to do. And this is what I was communicating yesterday at dog group. Rather than teaching our dogs, okay, when I tell you to sit, I say sit 5 times. I pull up on the leash and I push down on your bum because you're just not listening to me. So I force you into the sit. And then once you're there, I say stay, 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 because technically you are still not understanding the idea, or you're overwhelmed and you can't stay in that position. Now, rather than doing that, what we do is we help the dog understand some marker words. Okay. So when I say sit, you say sit until I tell you that you're released. And in our case, we generally teach like free or break or okay to let the dog go find their own fun. That's a window of opportunity thing. Or we say something like yes, or use a clicker or choop, something like that. And then the dog comes to us for a reward. So they break the position when we give them a verbal cue to come to us. Or we move from the sit position into another position. So the dog doesn't leave that sit position until I say down or until I say heel. But when I move from a sit to a heel, the dog stays in the heel until I tell them otherwise. So once people start to understand that idea, then they work on it at home and then they start to build those skills using communication tools like that. The dog starts to understand because they have some more clarity in that communication. And when the dog starts to understand a little bit better, their life situation gets better because they're not being forced into situations. There's less force. There's less conflict, I guess is the better word. And then all of a sudden, now, when they're in environments where there's quite a lot of stimulation, they're actually better at listening to us because they have clarity in instruction. So when we see quite often pet dog owners go sit, stay, right, and then the dog eventually breaks on their own. The dog hasn't learned that sit, stay means sit and stay in that position. So by working on like sit and then free or sit and then yes, come to me, then the dog starts to understand like, oh, okay, I stay in this position until I'm told to do something else. Anyway, I just wanted to come really quickly talk about that because communication, if we're clear with our communication and our ritual communication is the same all the time, then the dogs will very quickly understand what they can and cannot do. And their life will get much easier, and so will yours, and there'll be less frustration all around. Anyway, got to go to work. Hope you had a fantastic day today, or hope you're going to have a fantastic day. If you have any questions on this idea, please send them my way. I'm happy to elaborate a little bit more on them. Um, so yeah, so hey Carl, I have a question about, like how do you teach the dog to stay in that position until I tell them to release or move into another position? Happy to answer that question or questions similar to that or anything that's popped up in this. And just keep in mind that first and third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we do the live Q&A. So you pop on for a half an hour, get your questions answered. Till next time, happy training. Bye for now. Whoop.